Hey guys and girls, thank you for joining me tonight. I've got a lot to talk about now. We've got quite a bit of Nikon news and Z-mount information. There's new cameras, new lenses and all sorts of things coming out. So just like to review some of my thoughts of these. I have had a few new purchases recently, so I'd like to show you those and walk you through them. Foremost of that is a new lens, and that's another Viltrox lens, but a Z-mount of course, so that's why it's relevant to this Nikon orientated channel, because it's certainly for a Nikon mount. And it's a great budget value. Very, very comfortable and brilliant photo quality prime lens. It's this one here on my Z9 right now. I'll just bring it up in front of you. And this one here is the Viltrox 16mm F1.8. So it's a very bright aperture, high quality lens. This is one of their premium lenses. So if I can just bring it up against my face here, so you can see it proportionally. That's what it looks like on the Z9. See basically the size, shape and so on of it. And it's a beautiful looking lens. It looks very high quality. That's the first thing you notice when you look at it. It looks fantastic. I'll just take it off the camera for a second to run you through it and show you through its features, just so you can see it by itself. So just take that off. Put the little cap on there just to make it a little bit safe. But as you can see here, it's a fine looking unit. Has a little LED screen on it so that when it's connected to the camera, that illuminates up and you can see your aperture and distance monitors and all sorts of little features in that screen. Very similar to the S-mount line lenses that have that screen, like the 51.2 for example, the 35, I think the 80, no, 85 doesn't have it, but there are various others that do. Certainly the 70 to 200 has one. So it has that theme of high-end, high-quality features. Apart from that, it also has some interesting button layouts here. Now for me, what's very important is that it has a autofocus and manual focus switch, which I love that. I love being able to have the switch and then go straight to manual and know that the autofocus is not going to interfere with it, and vice versa. Then also what we've got here is some FN buttons, so you can program them to remember various positions of your focus setting. So that's terrific as well. And of course you've got your aperture ring with clicks or declick, so you can actually declick it and you can click it. And it feels actually very good, very tactile feel to it. You know when you're moving the dial, you can actually definitely see and feel that quite well. And of course it's displayed up on the little screen as well to help you. If you put it onto the A automatic setting, then you just do everything by your wheels and your camera, and it becomes just like any other traditional lens. But it's nice to have the manual features should you wish to use that. So what about the size, weight and feel of it? Well, the size, weight and feel, very interestingly enough, and I've got another lens here from Viltrox, it's very similar, and that is this 85mm prime. So the 85mm prime, if I just take the hood off it, the size and weight and feel and girth is very similar. The 85 is a little thicker, but the 16 is a little longer, a little taller. But the weight, it feels very much the same weight as the 85mm 1.8 prime. So if you wanted to know roughly what it felt like in the hand, at least anyway, very similar to this 85, which I found very excellent. I used that in a photo session just not long ago. I did a photo shoot with a young gentleman called Jake Robinson, and he's a lovely young man. He does death metal music, and we did a little music video for him, and I took some photos for his album cover. So that was a lot of fun to do, and I used the 85 a lot for that when it came to the photos. When I was doing the video, I was using the 24 and the 35, between them for most of the shooting. And they all perform very well. So I just want to let you know that when I use these Viltrox lenses for video, the autofocus capability, the quality of the image, the brightness, etc. is all fantastic for video, just as it is for photos. And that's a great reason to get them, because they're great value and they work in any situation very well. So getting back to this lens though, which is the context of our conversation today, the 16mm. I have always wanted a very bright aperture wide, but just there was nothing available. I had the 14 to 30 Nikon lens. That was a great one at f4, but the problem was it was at f4. So when I needed a much brighter situation where I maybe didn't have lighting around with me or not much of it, might have been in a dark room and I couldn't use flash or I couldn't use LED lighting because it was too disturbing for the situation or it was out of context, then what I would do, I was struggling. So with this one here at f1.8, it's extremely bright aperture and you can get away with not having much lighting with you at all. Maybe a small little LED panel is all you need. So this is fantastic for multiple functions. It's awesome lens with its bright aperture for things like architectural photography. If you're doing real estate photography, for example, very good for that in tight spaces and in darker room settings where you may be just using natural light, for example, opening up the windows. If you're in a situation where you're doing a wedding and it's a reception, and in that reception often they're almost like candlelight in the atmosphere, well, that's very romantic and sweet and great when they're doing their dancing, but it's terrible for taking photos or video. But with a nice bright aperture like this, you can certainly do that, and you get away with it really well. A lot more so than you would if you had an f2.8 lens. So, of course, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? You might say, well, why don't you just get the Nikon 14 to 24? Now, that is a brilliant lens. It's an S-line lens, super high quality. Everybody raves about how great a lens it is, but it has only a couple of downsides for me. One is it's 2.8 and it's not 1.8. And the 1.8 factor does help a lot and makes a big difference in certain situations. The second thing is it's quite a bulkier lens. It's a little bit bigger than this, and that makes it just a little heavier and cumbersome in the bag when I need a wide. At 16mm, I find that's pretty much perfect. I found that 14, when I used to use 14 from time to time, it was so wide that it created a very easy to manufacture a lot of distortion. So if you were just slightly up or slightly down, or the left or the right, angular, it would exaggerate that a lot in the lines in the image, and it would make it very frustrating to get everything, graphically perfect. A little bit more forgiving at 16, even if it's marginal. But 16 is more than wide enough for anything I need. And I'll show you some images, of course. I'll come up illustrating exactly what this image looks like, and I'll compare it with 24. Because a 24mm lens, for example, as brilliant as they are, they're also very common in most lenses you buy as a kit. So you'll often get a 24 to 70 or a 24 to 120 or 24 to 200 or something, and it's always got a 24 in it. That's often the starting point in a lot of lenses, particularly with Nikon. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great. It's a nice wide look. So I'll compare it. I'll show you the difference between 16 and what 24 looks like. Now, the other reason I'm going to show you that difference, and that's because of if I use this on my ZFC. See, right now, I'm filming with the ZFC, which is a flip-out screen, nice cropped sensor camera, and it performs beautifully for video. So why do I have the ZFC instead of maybe a Z6 III or even the Z52 that's coming out? Well, the reason is I like the retro styling. It's a very attractive looking camera. So regardless of what extra features they have in a more modern camera like the Z52 or the Z6 III, I have all the features I need in the Z9 anyway. So if I need features, if I need high-end specs, I've got a Z9 to do that. I'm not missing out. But this ZFC is brilliant for doing video with a flip-out screen and the super sticky autofocus. Well, it's just a brilliant little camera setup for me to do videos just like I'm doing now, or have something super small and light that you can compact into a small camera bag and take with you anywhere, and it's not intrusive or heavy. You want to try and pack this with a decent lens in any camera bag, I tell you what, it's a little bit of a monster. Sometimes I even regret having the Z9 rather than a Z8 or something smaller. But I never regret all the features, and I never regret the battery life. So that is also excellent. It's one of the few cameras, with this Z8 as well, that you can actually leave like this without a lens on, and it has a protective cover. Now, I'm not suggesting you should leave your camera like that exposed, because you never know what could happen. Anything can get in, maybe dust in a storm, but look, let's face it, I'm in a sealed room in an air-conditioned environment, so I have nothing to fear from dust and contaminants getting in right now. So it's a good situation for me at this moment. So anyway, I was talking about the 14 to 24, and the 14 to 24 is a brilliant lens, high quality, has a reasonable aperture at 2.8, but doesn't compete with the 1.8 that we have here with this lens. The other thing is about it is this is so much cheaper. This cost me $750 Australian or 500 US. That is super, super cheap. The 14 to 24 S-line lens at 2.8 cost $4,000 plus Australian. So it's actually 5 times more expensive than this lens to use for a wide. And it doesn't have this aperture, and it's heavier, and it doesn't have one feature that this has. This one feature is mind-blowing. Really don't underestimate this feature. It takes 77mm filters. I have tons of 77mm filters anyway already, because I've owned so many other lenses that have that, like the 7200 and various other lenses I own. So 77 is a common filter size for a lot of working professionals. They'll have those available, and I already had them available, which means I had to buy no filters for this lens, which is a great saving on top. Now let's discuss the 14 to 24's filter size. 112 millimeters. You know how expensive they are? They're like $300 a filter. You can spend $1,000 to get a set of filters for that lens. That's insanely expensive for just the filters. So you spend over $4,000 on the lens, and then you spend another $1,000 on filters because you'd never have them lying around. I mean, why else would you have 112mm filters unless it was for that one particular lens? Here, having a common and relatively inexpensive 77mm filter size is brilliant. That is really hard to underestimate, the value of that and how portable and easy they are to obtain. So yeah, I'm really loving this. I'm loving the build quality. It's a very beautiful lens. Right now I do have a little filter on it. You can call it a filter. It's actually just a UV filter. The only reason I have it on the lens is to protect the element, but apart from protecting the element, it came with the lens when I purchased it free of charge. So it cost me nothing to have this on as a protection, and I can always take it off if I'm particularly worried about details of image quality. If I think it's going to negatively affect the shot in any way, I can just remove it. But it's a great secondary bump protection. So sure, you can have your lens cap. Lens cap goes on as well anyway, but it's just, a secondary form of protection is pretty awesome. I'm quite happy with that. So I'm pleased that I have it. So it's usually on the lens just to protect them. In fact, they all have that. All my Viltrox lenses do, because they all come with them free of charge when I bought them. So anyway, I'm loving this lens, and I just wanted to really highly recommend it, that if you're after a wide prime lens that you can carry around and it's user-friendly, takes decent filters, and is a very great value for money purchase at high quality, I highly recommend this 16mm F1.8 from Viltrox. This is actually, and I should mention this is actually a premium lens. It's not like the 24, the 35, the 50, 85, so on I have, which are their mediocre range. And when I say mediocre, I mean there's nothing exceptional about them. They're just a prime lens that works well. This here is actually weather sealed. You can see a little maybe red ring around that, and I'll bring up some close-up photos, of course, but there is a red ring, and that red ring is a rubberized seal. It has actually about 5 different elements of sealing throughout this lens, so it is very weather enduring. So when you're taking this out on your hikes, you're going out and taking wildlife, or you're taking big scenery shots, and it might be at the beach or rough conditions and blowy and windy, you can be sure that this lens will hold up to a little bit of rain and dust, and there'll be no issue because it is a weather sealed lens. So that's very encouraging. So it is a high-end, high-quality build with an extremely good autofocus motor setup, a higher-end autofocus motor than the traditional Viltrox. So the Viltroxes are working fine with autofocus. You can see that right now. I'm using the 35mm f1.8 Viltrox lens on the ZFC, and it's working beautifully. It's getting great focus. I can see the little yellow box on my eye on the flip-out screen, and I can see that no matter where I go, that yellow box is following me and keeping focus the whole time. So I'm very impressed with the ZFC for this sort of vlogging arrangement, but also very impressed with the Viltrox lenses and value for money wise. The average Viltrox lens here, here I've got a 24 in hand. Here's the 50mm I've got just here. These lenses, they're costing around $500 on average Australian. I got mine for about $400. I got a good bargain with a coupon that gave me about $100 off. And if you shop around, you'll find such coupons and bargains. But at $400 roughly, or let's say $450 each for a prime lens that's an f1.8, that's super cheap and great value. And they work extremely well and are sharp. This one here, of course, being a premium make and model lens, I'm highly recommending it because there's just nothing wrong with it and everything right about it. So it's a great purchase. You won't regret it. And for what I paid anyway, around $750 at a fifth of the, 20% of the price of the Nikon 14 to 24, that is an incredible bargain and very versatile. So I'm highly recommending that lens. So apart from this lens here that I'd like to talk to you about, there's one other lens I can mention today from Viltrox. And I'm no Viltrox shrill, it's just simply that I found them great value and I purchased them myself cheap. I get no kickbacks from Viltrox, I get nothing for free. But I found a great value for money. Now another one they've just released, which is a high-end one, it's what they call the lab design, which means they've said to the labs who design them, we'll give you free reign, just make the best damn lens you can. They've built an 135 f1.8 prime. So that's very similar to the Plena in its idea. Now, I'm not trying to compare it and saying, oh, it's every bit as good as the Plena, because obviously Nikon have made that a flagship sort of lens for that portrait arrangement. And it's a beautiful lens. Looks great, performs well. It's just a terrific lens. But it is $4,500 for one lens. And it's, it's not an obscure focal length, but it's one you may not use as many times as you think you will. So, all right, 85 1.8, this one here, the 85 f1.8, that is my favorite portrait lens. because it's wide enough that you can take a full body. If you want to step back a bit, you just come in a little bit, you get your tighter headshots. 135, you've got to walk back so far to get a full body shot out of that. It means you're going to really want to change lenses anyway. So then you're going back and forth in lenses, and that can be a bit annoying. But at the 85, you just leave it on, you can do pretty much everything. I find that a more versatile focal length. That's why I never would have bought the Planner at $4,000. I thought that was outrageous for something I probably wouldn't use as much as I would like. In contrast to that, if I'm only spending $1,000 roughly for this 135mm 1.8 from Viltrox, then I'm more likely to buy it and use it and just have it for the sake of it, because it's only a quarter of the price of the Nikon one. So it's sort of cruel to keep bringing that out, but I've got to keep saying it for value for money. Not talking about perfection of image quality. I'm sure that the Nikon version, the Planner's up here, and the Viltrox one's a little bit step lower. Maybe the Nikon one's a 10 out of 10, and the Viltrox might be an 8.5 or 9 out of 10. I'm realistic as to what you get for your money, and these aftermarket lenses may not be 100% as good as the professional Nikon lenses, but then I'm just talking about horses for courses and value for money. When you're talking about spending $1,000 or spending $4,000, well, you've got to stop and think a little bit and just hold the horses and think, is the value there for me? Let me give you a brief illustration. I won't bore you with stories, but it's an example. I do a lot of fishing. I do like to go fishing, and particularly out in the sea. I don't go deep ocean fishing, but just in bays and harbours. And I've owned 2 boats. And I had a lot of fun with those boats, and the kids loved them. The wife would come out with me and we'd have a great day. But the problem is, though, I found that for the expense of the boat and all the insurance and the maintenance and the work, the towing, setting the car up to tow, and then having to bring it back and clean it down and wash it up and flush the motor, it was so much work for one day's fishing. It was like another whole day's just maintenance and arranging. It was too much effort. So what I've decided to do from now on is when I go fishing in a boat, I hire the boat. Rather than spend $100,000 on a boat and then thousands of dollars a year on maintenance and care, isn't it easier just to spend a couple of $100 a few times a year and hire someone else's boat, and they got all the hassles and issues and cleaning and maintenance, and all I have to do is jump in, turn the key and drive it off, and then hand it back when I'm done. That to me was a much better value arrangement, and that's what I'm doing now. Now that context is what I would like to illustrate with high-end expensive lenses. There are going to be certain times when you need a very high-end lens combination because you may be doing a function where you're being highly paid and you want the best possible results. Maybe even the customer is requesting you use a particular lens or a particular style of lens at least. And so to please them, you can still have this lens by hiring it. There are many camera hiring companies. I know in Brisbane there are many. So in every country, in every city, there'll be hiring companies. Hire the lens you need if it's a high-end expensive lens. Hire it for the weekend. A couple of $100, you give it back, it's done. The professional gig you had to use it for will pay for that expense. You can write anything off on taxes as a business expense as well. And really that's a more sensible way of very high-end expensive gear to obtain it and use it for the need. 9 times out of 10 though, that quarter of the price aftermarket lens will do you on a daily basis. So just consider that renting is a serious and very reasonable option when we're talking about expensive high-end products. I know I hired, and I have a video, go back about 5 years, I hired a Sony FS7. That was a state-of-the-art video recorder at the time. And I did a Renaissance festival for a weekend, and I was being paid well for that, and it was worth hiring a high-end camera and lens combination so I could make sure I got the best results for that business. And they were very happy with the results. So that was worth it for me to hire, and then I just revert back to my Nikon equipment when I need it for my more casual gigs. So just please consider that rather than throwing out tens of thousands of dollars on these high-end lenses that you may or may not get value back from. Just something to consider. So just getting back to the discussion on these lenses, I wanted to illustrate that this recent purchase as well, this is the Tamron 35 to 150 for Nikon Z mount, and it's f2 to f2.8. Now, I bought this lens because I was so impressed with the technology associated with it. The fact that you can have this variable aperture that's so wide. f2 it starts off in, then it goes to 2.5, about 75 mils, and then you're getting 2.8 from about 120 on. So this is actually a brilliant lens, and the reason I had to have this in my possession was the versatility. For a start, 35 to 150 is every 90% of all the photo and video that I do is encompassed in this one lens. So I don't need a 24 to 70, I don't need a 70 to 200. This pretty much does everything. The other advantage of this lens, and I will connect it with the Viltrox in just a minute, the other connection with this here is that if I put this on my crop sensor camera, and I'm illustrating it with a ZFC right now, but lately they've just released this wonderful new Z50 Mark II, which we'll talk about in a minute. And that's, of course, a crop sensor camera as well. And if you were to put this lens, as heavy and bulky as it is, on that little camera, you've now got a 50 to 220. So 50 millimeters to 220 millimeters, what a fabulous range that is, particularly when you consider the bright aperture you got. So that's an incredibly versatile lens. That combination is something like a wedding second shooter. They can pretty much do anything with you. So if you're using your Z9 for doing a lot of video and someone else has the crop sensor camera and they're snapping some photos while you're taking the video, you can't take photos at the same time necessarily, it's inconvenient. So you can run the video camera going, you can have someone with a little crop sensor camera and this lens here, and they, no matter what they encounter, they're going to be able to take a photo of it from 50 to 220. That's a great option. So the technology here is brilliant that these various companies are bringing out at the moment, whether it be Tamron, Nikon, or it'd be Viltrox or any other brand, it doesn't matter. They're all great. I mean, there's no such thing as a bad lens these days. I don't care what you spend. You spend $200, you spend $2,000, you're going to get a great lens because they just are. The technology is that they build them sharp and of high quality. So you're only compromising maybe on the building materials and the sealing. That's probably 90% of the difference between a high-end one and a lower-end lens. But comparing these two here, this is the technology that I was talking about with this Tamron lens. The technology here to get a super wide lens like 16mm and have it at f1.8, and yet still have the sealing, the function buttons, the display, the very, very practical filter size, and all those other little features in this compact little unit here that's so inexpensive. That's brilliant technology. So I purchased this as a celebration of the technology, as well as the fact that I needed an ultra wide that was bright. So I was very pleased with my purchase, and I can't see any reason why anybody would have any regrets from getting it. Now, I said the same about the Viltrox 20mm 2.8, another brilliant wide lens. It's very inexpensive. That one's only about $250, and what a great purchase that is if you wanted a very, very cheap and lightweight wide angle. But it just wasn't quite wide enough, and it wasn't quite bright enough for my particular needs. So this is where this one comes in, and I find this one would probably be a very welcome and highly used accessory in my photography gear now. So what I'd like to do is also discuss a bit more about the Z50. Now, I find that Z50 Mark II was an excellent surprise package. I didn't see that really coming for some time. It was just sort of popped in on the market there and announced, and obviously now you can't purchase it necessarily straight away, but you can pre-order it. And so it'll be coming along, I'll say, early next year for sure. Now, it sounds like great value for money. It's a little bit more expensive than the ZFC that I'm using right now and the previous Z50, and that's fair enough, just like the Z6 III. Z6 III was a lot more expensive than the Z6 II. That's reasonable because you're getting a lot more features. Now, with the Z50 II, getting the X-Speed 7 processor in it, whoa, mind blown. I can't believe it. That's fantastic for an inexpensive crop sensor camera to get such a high-end processor. I wasn't seeing that coming. I thought they might do like a Z6 II thing and have two X-Speed 6 processors in it or something. But to go to the Z7 in such a X-Speed 7 in such a small camera and a budget camera, that is a real blessing and bonus. So well done, Nikon. That's brilliant. And I do love my Nikon cameras. I mean, I might talk a lot about off-market lenses and that from time to time, but I still have all Nikon cameras. The actual bodies, I think, are where the money should be spent. The technology that Nikon have in their body system and the value you get is great. Even if it's a very expensive one, like this Z9, for example, this is not a cheap camera body. You know, $8,000 to $9,000 for one of those. But I bought it because I don't care. I don't care how much it costs. The camera body is your computer. It's everything. You know, that's going to be upgradable and going to be relevant for years to come. Lenses, when they're inexpensive, you can sell them and buy and sell and get something different if you change your mind. I do that all the time. I'm always buying and selling lenses and swapping around, trying new products. But my camera body, these Nikon camera bodies, they're not going anywhere. I love them. So I'm sticking with them for sure. So having said that, though, the Z50 Mark II, they've got the great XB7 processor, which is going to revolutionize all the functions, the speed, processing, and of course, very importantly, the autofocus is going to be second to none. Now, I already mentioned that my ZFC I'm using right now has amazing video autofocus. I don't know what they did, but the algorithm, the package, maybe of the smaller sensor, the less focus points, a more modern version of these crop sensor cameras, all that together made the ZFC awesome, a real firehouse when it comes to autofocus in video. It is really exceptionally very good. So I just wanted to let you know that. But with the XB7 processor and the Z52, it's going to be even better. So it's going to be astounding, especially with a few firmware upgrades. Initially, there'll be some quirks they'll discover and they'll refine that. And now Nikon have been very good with firmware upgrades too. So you'll get a plethora of those in the first couple of months, and then it'll be an astounding camera, even more so than it is now. The only downside I could put onto this new Z52, if I want to poo-poo something, would be I would have liked to see a new sensor. They've got what I imagine is the same sensor that they used in the Z50 Mark I, the same one in the ZFC, and probably the same one from the D500. It's just getting a bit long in the tooth. The same 20.9 megapixel sensor. Look, it's a great sensor. It works well. But, you know, it's been many years. I think Nikon, you should have upgraded that one and maybe given us a few more megapixels. If you're going to give us that high-end processor, why not something like a 25 or a 28 megapixel sensor, and then it would be a worthy D500 replacement. With 21 megapixels and an older sensor, I just felt that was a bit disappointing, especially when you consider the Z6 Mark III got a new sensor. So I think they shortchanged everybody a little bit there. Obviously, something had to give because they're trying to keep the costs down. So I'm empathetic to that. You can't just throw everything in the bucket at this new budget in camera, because then why is anybody going to buy a Z6 or a Z8 or a Z9 then? So I understand that they've got to put, like Canon have. Canon have the cripple hammer, where they knock down the camera's specs on purpose so they don't compete with the higher end gear. Well, that's sort of what Nikon have had to do here with this Z50 Mark II. They've had to cripple hammer it a little bit just so it doesn't outsell all the other cameras in their range, their higher end ones. And that's fair enough. So that's the only whinging point I've got, but I'm sure it's ultimately its performance and image quality are excellent. They always have been, so I don't see any reason that's changed. And certainly I like the fact that they've introduced now their full flip-out screen. So that flip-out screen, very much like the Z6 III, and the ZFC have, that's a great feature. Like right now I'm looking at myself, I can see that I'm in frame, I can see I'm in focus, I can see it's recording because it has that red box around the frame, and I can see all the little numbers there telling me what aperture and speed I'm at. So I'm very appreciative of the flip-out screen. It's a very handy thing to have in a camera, especially these lightweight ones that you never know where you're going to use them and what situation you're in. So I'm very happy with Nikon's lineup at the moment. They're doing some amazing stuff. Recently got the 50 f1.4 and the 35 1.4 out. That's a great option for people who have a budget option that's a bright aperture. So that's well done. Good on them for that. So I'd like to basically wrap up the night celebrating the Z50 Mark II release. I think that's a great entry-level camera that will help people be introduced into the Nikon system and love everything they got from day one, because there's no shortfalls with it. And that was one of the things about the original Nikon Z cameras. There were shortfalls, there were some slight negatives with features. Now every camera they released is just an absolute powerhouse and a high-end performer. So how could you not love them? When you pick one up and you give it your first try, I reckon a whole new audience for Nikon will start being introduced thanks to these budget models that are coming out so feature-packed. So I'm very excited for the future of the Nikon cameras and lenses. I'm looking forward to seeing what else they bring out and produce. But we've got a lot to celebrate at the moment. So I just want to say well done, Nikon, and I'm thanking you guys for supporting my channel and watching. I hope I can be of use to you in the future still too. And if there's anything you want me to talk about and discuss, please always feel free to mention it and drop a comment, because I'm happy to please you by discussing what you want to hear. So thank you, have a good night, and I appreciate your time.